I visited a nursing home for Brian's parents, my fiancé. There, I was led to a separate room and couldn't believe what a caregiver told me.
Run away now! Those people, 10 years ago.
I was asked to cover the entrance fee for the nursing home.
Betty, actually, Dad and Mom were supposed to move in today, but I lent a considerable amount of money to a friend who's a CEO. I want to pay for a year in advance, but I'm short.
Betty, could you lend it to me?
I promise to pay you back soon.
Brian made this request. Then, my mother-in-law Angela said,
I'm sorry, but we will really pay you back soon.
And my father-in-law Kevin apologized.
I'm sorry for causing such trouble, especially since you're our son's fiancé.
They don't realize I know it's all lies.
If Brian is that insistent, just for a week then.
I acted as though I reluctantly agreed.
Really? I knew you'd say that, Betty.
Brian was beaming. Then Angela and Kevin came over and patted me on the shoulder.
Thank you. We will definitely make it up to you. We're blessed to have the best daughter-in-law. You're a lifesaver.
They both seemed tearful. Despite feeling contempt, I played the role of a delighted and praised fiancé. Internally, I thought,
just you wait. I won't let you exploit me as you wish. Huh? Touring the nursing home?
I inadvertently voiced my puzzlement. Brian, as if it were obvious, tilted his head and said,
Yeah, you'll come with me, right?
As I've mentioned before, my parents are quite elderly. Ever since Mom fell at home, she hasn't been walking well. Responding to Brian's suggestion.
But at this time of year.
I hesitated, but he seemed unwilling to change his mind. My name is Betty, I'm 29 years old. I work at an insurance company, handling assessments. I met my boyfriend and fiancé Brian 2 years ago, near my favorite museum in a park. He worked at a real estate company nearby and had gone out to eat lunch in the park when I dropped a postcard I bought from the museum's gift shop, and he picked it up for me.
You dropped this.
Brian picked up the postcard that had slipped from my bag, took out a handkerchief from his pocket, dusted the sand off it, and handed it to me. I had a good impression of him from the start because he was kind. I often visited that museum, and after several visits, I ran into Brian again. It was lunchtime, and he said,
Would you like to eat together?
We decided to have lunch together with takeout from a nearby cafe. After that, we exchanged contact information and started meeting outside of the park as well. We eventually moved in together, and Brian, having had many relationships, was smooth with dates and communication. Being new to romance, I relied on him, and he was the one who confessed and proposed. I was somewhat swept along, but I thought that's just how marriage is, as others told me. However, Brian had a bad habit that crossed my mind even when I said yes to his proposal. Brian had an unusually high pride and boasted about graduating from a prestigious private university. He was usually calm and didn't show such an attitude, but occasionally, he would make such remarks. For instance, when it comes to a team member who dropped out of school.
It's because he has a low level of education.
Or when seeing a poorly dressed homeless person.
I wouldn't want to end up like that.
And laugh. He knew I had a college degree.
Betty, you don't know much about anything.
But often made somewhat condescending remarks.
That's just you liking to show off knowledge you don't need at the moment, but I know that too.
I retort, but Brian is convinced I'm just pretending to know. This might make Brian seem like a bad guy, but he's taken me to various art galleries and museums, never raising his voice or being violent. We've never really fought, sometimes to the point where I wonder if we're both just holding back.
If there's something you want to say, let's talk about it.
Even though I says this,
I have no complaints about you, Betty. If you have any issues with me, please tell me right away.
That's the kind of response that comes. So, I said,
I wish you wouldn't belittle people so much. Did I belittle someone?
Seemingly having no recollection, though he probably isn't aware of it. He often talks about his company to others, sometimes sharing things that I suspect should be confidential, which worries me.
Are you sure it's okay to share that? It sounds important to the company. He's a friend, so he won't tell anyone else.
He just brushed it off. Working at an insurance company, I know there are things you must never share, even with family. I wonder if real estate is different. Brian seems so carefree about it, so I've tried to convince myself it's okay if he thinks so. But the idea of him speaking so freely about various things, including possibly about me, doesn't sit well with me. Indeed, Brian often shares things with me that others would likely want kept secret. Since I'm a person who doesn't share other secrets, I try to let it slide, but my discomfort has been growing. And my unease about our upcoming marriage only increased after meeting each other's parents. When we got engaged, we decided it was time to meet each other's parents. At my house.
Thank you for marrying my daughter, who couldn't find someone to marry at her age.
My mother, Emily, was welcoming. Then my dad, Thomas. Brian is a bit. He seemed reluctant, but he eventually agreed to the marriage.
If Betty has chosen him.
So, I asked, what's wrong? But my dad seemed hesitant to talk and ultimately didn't share. When I mentioned it to my mom,
Thomas just feels lonely about you getting married.
She laughed it off. Given my dad has always been thoughtful, I worried there might have been something off he sensed. Brian is charming and articulate, perhaps due to his job. He was thoroughly engaging throughout the visit and seemed to enjoy my mom's cooking, winning her over completely. Then came the day to meet his parents for the first time. I went to his house, nervous. His home was as spacious and nice as he said it would be. It might just be me thinking it looked like what nouveau riche would build. The color scheme was flashy, and it stood out in the quiet residential area. When I rang the doorbell,
"Welcome."
A welcoming future parent-in-law greeted me. I could see ostentatiously expensive furniture inside, which was off-putting.
Betty. You like art, right? We have quite a bit of that here. Take a look around.
Brian said, but honestly, it wasn't to my taste, and I didn't find it interesting. However, I didn't want to criticize someone else's interests, and thinking it looked nouveau riche might just be my prejudice. Rethinking my approach, I faced his parents.
Nice to meet you, I'm Betty. Please accept this.
I greeted them politely and offered a gift. It was a cake from a famous bakery. I chose something that would appeal to people around Brian's parents' age. They were overly delighted by it, which was a relief.
Thank you. We wouldn't buy this for ourselves.
Laughing, his mother says,
I'll go cut it.
She said and stood up. Do you not like sweets? I asked his father.
Of course. I love them.
He replied with a smile. At that moment, I thought they seemed like nice people. However, when the future mother-in-law returned with a tray of sliced cake, I was taken aback.
Here you go.
There were 4 small plates on the tray. She placed it in front of everyone.
What's this about?
I wondered internally. The cake I brought was meant to be cut and served. Each plate had 2 slices on it. But my plate had only 1 slice, and it was much thinner than the others. Seeing me frozen, "What's wrong?" Brian asked.
It's nothing.
I managed to say after a struggle. Maybe they just mixed up their slice and mine. My mom often serves herself less when we have guests, out of politeness. but glancing at his mom, she was enjoying her 2 thick slices of cake.
Ah, this cake is delicious. Thank you, Betty. Oh, Kevin. Would you like some more?
Angela noticed Kevin's empty plate and asked. Then Brian said,
I'll have some more too. Could you cut it a bit thicker this time? You've always been a big eater.
Angela laughed and stood up. She took my plate along with the others, but only 3 returned. Angela, Kevin, and Brian's plates. Without even asking if I wanted more, my plate was cleared away. The conversation continued, and they finished the entire cake, but I was only given that first thin slice. Of course, since it was a gift, it wouldn't have mattered if there wasn't a piece for me, but isn't it normal to at least ask if someone would like more? I wondered if it was just me as my first visit came to an end. However, my distrust, or rather the feeling that something was off with my future in-laws, only grew. That feeling became definitive when we went to tour the nursing home. Brian had previously mentioned,
I won't let them be cared for at home. They both want to live in a facility.
I was reassured by that. Since my parents also said they didn't intend to burden me, we planned to continue living in our current home, just the 2 of us. But then, one day, Brian said,
I'd like you to come with me to tour my parents' nursing home.
I was surprised.
Why should I be there when we're not even married yet?
My parents consulted a professional advisor about the nursing home situation and assured me that they would handle the financial aspect themselves to ensure I wouldn't be burdened much financially.
I want you to see if the facility is comfortable for my parents to live in. Plus, consider the location for visits and such.
Brian said, but I was honestly reluctant. Since that day, every time I met the future in-laws, they either pushed unwanted things on me or pestered me about my job. Even when I said I couldn't talk because it was confidential, they'd say it should be fine since we're family. My family values privacy, even among ourselves, and believes there are things that shouldn't be shared, so I was really troubled. But honestly, living with and caring for those 2 seemed much worse. I feared they might not like the facility and propose living with us instead. Feeling this way, I agreed to accompany them to the facility. The facility we visited seemed much more luxurious than what had been described for my in-laws. When Brian's parents go there, someone from the facility speaks to them. He was still a young man.
Hello, I'm Daniel, your contact. You're here for the admission process today, right?
Yes. Angela nodded.
Eh?
And I inadvertently said, because I was told we were just going to look around. Brian raised his hand in an apologetic gesture and said,
Sorry. Actually, they went by themselves before and ended up liking it. But I only heard about it just before we came, so I didn't know how to bring it up.
Is that so? I was surprised they decided on such a luxurious place after just one visit. Feeling uneasy, the facility's staff approached us unexpectedly.
You're Brian's fiancé, right? I can give you a brief tour of the facility. Angela and Kevin, could you head to the room you were interested in before? Brian, you can join them if you'd like.
Daniel suggested, and while the 2 nodded, Brian looked puzzled.
Can I also take a look around then? That's fine, but Angela and Kevin mentioned they wanted to show their son the room as soon as possible.
With a smile, Brian decided.
Then, I'll go see the room first.
And the 3 of them left. Watching them go were Daniel and I. Daniel suddenly became serious.
Please, this way.
Instead of showing me around, he led me to a nearby small room. Feeling pressured, I entered the room, which looked like a small conference room. Daniel closed the door, turned to me with a sense of urgency, and said,
Run away now! Those people, 10 years ago. What do you mean, run away, 10 years ago?
Confused, I looked up at Daniel. Realizing I was lost, Daniel took a deep breath.
Sorry for bringing you here so suddenly. There's something I need to tell you. Those three, actually. Eh?
I was shocked.
So making us pay the entrance fee and then canceling means they've run off with the money?
Daniel nodded to my trembling voice. I felt like I was about to collapse from the shock. Supporting me, Daniel offered. Please. He seated me in a chair. But why, knowing this, hasn't the facility reported them? I asked, completely baffled. Daniel began to explain, trying to calm me down. Please, calm down. First, I believe I'm the only one at this facility who knows they're the culprits of a scam. The incident from 10 years ago happened at a different facility. At a different facility? Then how do you know about it? Daniel said. It was when I was still a child. I used to visit my grandfather, who was living in a nursing home, and there I saw those three people and another woman. I think I accidentally wandered into a room while trying to find my way, where they were. Driven by innocent curiosity, Daniel peeked into the room and understood that the woman, named Barbara, was about to pay the entrance fee for the future in-laws. The three seemed genuinely sorry, saying they'd only borrow the money for now and apologized for the sudden inconvenience. Probably, due to some reason, they ran out of money, and the fiancé ended up paying. Losing interest, Daniel returned to his grandfather's room, but later saw the woman crying at the entrance, yelling at a staff member. Do you know where Brian and his parents are? It's my money. Why hasn't it come back to me? She was saying this. So, I asked a staff member I was friendly with, and apparently, Brian and his parents had come back to cancel their admission and left. They probably somehow managed to take the fiancé's money. But that was all done through official procedures, so the facility couldn't report it. It had to be the fiancé who did. Daniel thought it was unfortunate for the fiancé, who would inevitably catch them. After that, I got interested in working in care and started working at this facility. But I never imagined those three would continue committing the same crime without getting caught. I was simply stunned by Daniel's story. Everything was done to take money from me from the very beginning. I didn't want to believe that Brian's love was all fake, but Daniel's serious expression made me feel it was true. As tears spilled, Daniel offered me a handkerchief. Here, if it helps. I thanked him tearfully. After crying a bit, I surprisingly calmed down. Thanking Daniel, who had politely looked away, I asked him, "Could you please help me catch them?" Surprised at first, Daniel quickly responded firmly, "Of course." After cooling my swollen eyes, Daniel and I headed to the room where they were likely waiting as if nothing had happened. Entering the room, Brian greeted me with his usual kind smile. "Welcome back. You took quite a while, didn't you?" he said. I pretended to be surprised by looking at my watch. "Oh, indeed. This facility is so nice that I ended up taking my time looking around. I can see why Kevin and Angela liked it. I might decide on it in just one visit myself." Saying this made all three seem thoroughly convinced. Then Brian, with an overly deliberate tone, said, "Oh, right. Actually, even though my parents are moving in today, I lent a lump sum of money to a business acquaintance." Internally, I thought, "Here it comes." I exchanged a glance with Daniel for a moment. I wanted to pay for a year up front, but I'm short. The businessman said it would be returned in about a week. Betty, you brought your card today, right? Could you lend it to me? I'll pay you back immediately. Brian says that. And then Angela adds, I'm sorry, but we will really pay you back soon. She said to me, and Kevin apologized to me. I'm sorry for causing such trouble, even though you're our fiancé. They don't know that I'm aware all of it is a lie.
Just you wait. I won't let you take advantage of me as you please.
I resolved in my heart, showing reluctance and disarray on the surface. How much? It's about $100,000. You've been saving up for a while, right? You should have that much.
Indeed, my bank account does have $100,000. I've been single for years, living frugally, but that money isn't yours.
I murmured in my heart. And I showed reluctance even more. $100,000 is a huge amount. It's natural to refuse.
Isn't it okay to sign the contract next week?
Please, make it work. We're in the middle of selling the house to proceed the admission. If we don't sign today, my parents might have to spend about a week homeless.
This too must be all lies. Surely, there's no house selling contract.
Brian gripped my hands. Please.
Pleading. I wondered if all this while he played the role of a dependable man just for this moment. Brian always showed the composure of someone older. Had it been the old me, I might have been swayed by Brian begging like this. So, I acted accordingly.
If Brian says so, just for a week then.
Really? I knew you'd say that, Betty.
Brian's face lit up. Then Angela and Kevin came over, patting my shoulder.
Thank you. We will definitely return the favor. We're so lucky to have the best daughter. You're a lifesaver.
Both seemed on the verge of tears. Despite my contempt, I pretended to be a pleased and praised fiancé.
Oh, it's nothing much. It's just for a week, after all.
When I looked at Daniel, he said,
Those who need to sign the documents, please come this way.
And opened the door. Daniel and I had already discussed the dangers of actually signing any documents, even as an act. So, we decided to pretend to sign in a place away from the three. They wouldn't suspect Daniel and I were in cahoots. As expected, after a short while, Daniel returned and said,
Here are the details of the payment for the 2 residents for 1 year.
Presenting a fake statement with a smile, which they tucked away without a close look.
If you need to do any additional procedures regarding the admission, please contact this number. We can't assist without an appointment. Understood.
Brian received it. The number was Daniel's. This ensured that Daniel would be informed if they attempted to cancel. Thus, he could contact me. But that alone might not be enough. They could come up with some excuse. This is what the family is up to. There must be other things they're doing as well. I had decided to thoroughly expose all 3 of them. First, I decided to search Brian's room. We lived in separate rooms, and it was rare for us to enter each other's spaces. Especially me, I believed it was wrong to enter someone's room without permission, even if it was my boyfriend's, unless invited. Brian knew this, so he might have left something incriminating, thinking I would never enter. My suspicion was correct. From the back of his bookshelf in his room, I discovered a statement that clearly showed money was missing due to fraud. It seems to be out of my field, but it appears to be documents related to the purchase of a condominium. In other words, embezzlement. A real criminal. I murmured unintentionally. Moreover, Brian's room was much tidier than I expected. Rather, it was prepared for packing. Probably to leave the house as soon as the money was secured. Furthermore, I decided to shake Brian by bringing up my concerns while also collecting evidence of their previous activities at the other facility in coordination with Daniel.
By the way, is work going well recently? I'm also wondering about the $100,000 I loaned to Kevin and Angela. It's making me quite anxious to have it returned soon.
I said this at dinner, and Brian seemed visibly shaken.
They've only been in the facility for 2 days, haven't they?
You worry too much, Betty. Approaching Brian's room quietly at night, I heard him on the phone. Seemingly with his parents. My suspicion that showing concern about the money in Brian's job would lead him to contact his parents was correct. I couldn't hear the voices of my husband's parents, but I had previously purchased a high-performance voice recorder and carefully slid it under the door gap to record. I gathered the recorded audio as evidence and stored it in a box. 2 days later, I received a call from Daniel. It seemed there was a request to cancel the admission from my husband's parents.
It's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please come to the facility before then.
Daniel's voice over the phone sounded urgent.
Do you think it will go well?
Feeling anxious, I asked, and he reassured me.
It will be fine. With all this evidence, definitely.
And I felt empowered as the day arrived. Today was for the cancellation procedure, right? It's a shame. We thought you were pleased with our facility. I listened to the conversation between Daniel and the three from behind the door. Daniel sounded genuinely disappointed, an act of true realism. Brian responded, "Actually, a previous girlfriend had a serious accident. We need the money for her treatment. Dad and Mom said to prioritize her, so we decided to cancel for now." That's a huge lie. The supposed seriously injured girlfriend is right here. I was worried that Daniel would laugh, but he dexterously said,
"Is that so?"
He sounded worried. "Then we'll need the fiancé's card for this." "Oh, that's fine." I knew where it was stored. "Here, this one." There was my real card. He must have entered my room and found it without permission. Daniel then offered,
"Could you please sign these documents?"
He held out a piece of paper. And this?" Brian's voice, taken aback, was audible, and I couldn't help but laugh.
Daniel. This is just a blank sheet, right?" "Yes, it's blank."
Exactly. Since there was never an actual contract, there's nothing to cancel.
Hey, what's this about? Are you kidding me?
Brian, who had never raised his voice in front of me, was angry. Unable to contain myself any longer, I stood up and revealed myself.
It's not a joke at all. There was never a contract to begin with, so there's nothing to cancel. A blank sheet is perfectly sufficient for a non-existent cancellation. Betty!
The three looked at me in surprise. I stepped forward and laid out the evidence before them.
Here, this is a copy of the lump sum payment document you had someone else sign 10 years ago. The sudden accident and withdrawals from the joint bank account are exactly the same. What are you talking about, Betty?
Ignoring Brian's bewildered look, I then showed the real estate statement found in Brian's room.
And this is evidence of your embezzlement. I've already sent it to your company, so you should be thankful.
Brian's face turned pale at that. His parents began to clamor, asking what this all meant. Their uproar was ludicrous.
You've been deceiving me, Betty. If this gets to the company, I'll be fired. Yes, Betty. What is Brian supposed to do now?
And how are we supposed to live? Their successive complaints utterly exasperated me. I took out the voice recorder and played its contents at high volume.
That's okay. We're already preparing to escape. We can leave any time. She was a bit more cautious than the last woman, but it was easy.
Really, deceiving people for money is the way to go. Such voices were recorded.
What to do? You all are going to prison, you criminals. Taking people's money through deceit is despicable.
As I shouted with all my might, Brian aggressively approached me.
What did you say?
His hand was raised. Bracing for the blow, I shut my eyes and tensed up, but the impact never came.
Looks like we're about to add another crime to the list. Let go!
Daniel had restrained Brian. At that moment, the police, who had been called in advance, burst into the room.
This low-educated woman. Have you forgotten the kindness I've shown you for 2 years?
Brian was still yelling as the police subdued him. I couldn't help but snort in disbelief at his words.
Low-educated?
Whose? When I mentioned the university I attended.
That can't be,
Brian muttered. The name of the university I attended was far more prestigious than Brian's. I never thought it was worth mentioning, especially not to Brian, believing it wouldn't make any difference.
What does academic background have to do with character anyway? If going to university makes someone respectable, then thanks to you, I can confidently say that's not the case.
With that, I laughed, and Brian fell silent, unable to say anything more. Eventually, the three were arrested, and I moved out of the house I shared with Brian. Though I felt a bit of nostalgia for the house, I wanted to cut ties with those three more than anything. When I told my parents everything, they were extremely worried and scolded me for not relying on them sooner. My dad, who had been somewhat hesitant about the marriage, confessed. I've had a bad impression of Brian since then. I should have spoken up sooner. To my dad's regret.
It's not your fault, Dad. They are the ones to blame.
I reassured him. I was almost proud of my dad's judgment. My mom said,
I once said I wanted him to marry my daughter, but I take it back. If I see him again, I'll kick him.
My dad and I laughed together at that. After the ordeal, I started dating Daniel. Despite the unusual way we met, Daniel turned out to be a very sincere person. Though he's younger, we do argue at times, but we also engage in meaningful discussions, something that was refreshingly absent in my relationship with Brian. It made me realize Brian was truly only interested in me for money, without any consideration for our future. Daniel wasn't initially interested in museums or art galleries, but knowing I enjoyed them, he started to share this hobby with me. He's more of an indoor person, preferring to read books or play video games at home. His interest is in story-driven games, exploring different worlds through them. I said that the game was surprising considering his healthy appearance. I enjoy discovering new worlds through games with good narratives. He was answered. I have no connection to the game.
I see. I didn't know you could enjoy games that way.
I was surprised. So, I even tried playing some of his games. Ever since then, I've developed a fear of engagement and marriage. Daniel knows this, so he never presses the subject. However, when my parents visited my area, they met him in what was like a casual greeting. Despite his nervousness and difficulty speaking, my parents thought highly of him. My dad, contrasting his opinion from Brian's time.
Why not get married soon?
Even suggested. If I hadn't met Daniel, I might have been at a low point in my life, but now I feel incredibly fortunate. I hope to overcome my fears eventually and spend my life with him.